Joining us now in his first interview since Election Day is someone who knows all about waiting for results of a disputed election, former Vice President and 2000 Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore. Vice President Gore, thank you for spending some time with us. Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me, Lester. Good to be here.
A lot of us who were veterans of covering that 2000 race have thought about you in the last 2 days and wondered how you're processing all this. I know the circumstances not exactly identical, but give us your thoughts about what we're watching and from the perspective of your race 20 years ago.
Well, first of all, this is a completely different election from the one 20 years ago. Joe Biden has multiple pathways to secure his victory. Of course, I'm for him, and I'm hoping that will be the case very soon. But the most important principle that I defended 20 years ago, that Joe Biden and many others are defending tonight, is let's count every legally cast vote and obey the will of the American people. You know, I looked at the people standing in line to vote in the middle of a pandemic, some of them waiting in line 10, 11 hours in some cases. And the determination of the American people, in spite of what they were facing, to have the largest turnout in the entire history of our country, they're heroes, and they're redeeming the promise of America.
Mr. Vice President, it's Savannah Guthrie. And before I ask you a question, I wanted to give a disclaimer. My now husband, worked for you 20 years ago and has continued to work for you over the years. So I just want our viewers to know that. But let me ask you what you thought of the president's presentation today in the briefing room. You know, we just had a discussion with Hugh Hewitt about it. And I guess the question is whether you think it is fair grounds for him to say, look, I think there might be vote fraud. I think there might be an issue with the integrity of the election. In your mind, is it legitimate for him to make those allegations right now?
No, and not without providing any evidence. I was disappointed in his statement, but you know, we're now, the election is over with. The campaign is over with. All that remains is to count the votes. I was thinking as the president was speaking in the White House of the advice Mark Twain once gave to a group of young voters. He said, do right. You'll gratify some and astonish the rest. If Donald Trump does face a situation where the votes are all counted and he turns out not to be successful, I would urge him to do the right thing. And yes, it would astonish a lot of people, but it would be good for our country. And I'm not being joking about this. We are in some ways divided, and we absolutely face the need to try to come together. In his statement earlier today, Joe Biden emphasized that imperative. Look, we face the COVID-19 pandemic. We have got to get on with solving the climate crisis. We've got to lift the economy in a sustainable way to get the things moving again. And that requires pulling people together. I'm very happy that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are really focused on that task.
Mr. Vice, sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering, how important is imagery in all this? You talked about, you know, Joe Biden's been out a couple of times, 3 times now, I believe, since this election, and giving this aura of leadership and being in charge right now. Do you look at that and think about, you know, how you handled your circumstances and things you wish you had done or things you would advise him to do?
Oh, I don't think he needs any advice from me, Lester. I think he's been terrific. And I think back during the last part of this campaign, you take the speech that he gave at Gettysburg, the speech that he gave in Warm Springs, Georgia, and several others. This is really world-class leadership from Joe Biden. I know I'm a partisan, and you can discount that if you want, but I'm genuinely impressed with his focus, with his messaging to the entire country. He says over and over again that he's running as a proud Democrat, but he will be an American president. And I think the way he's been handling this short period since the election on Tuesday is in keeping with that vision of what he wants to be as president. And of course, by contrast, Donald Trump has come out and, without any evidence whatsoever, alleged that because he's losing it must be fraudulent. I wish he wouldn't do that. But I will say this to those who share my political views. The time for, criticizing Donald Trump as if the campaign was still underway, that's past now. We need to find a way, and I surely hope the president will find it in his capability to join in this process. I don't know if he will, but I hope that he will find a way to fall in behind those of us who are trying to bring the country together.
Mr. Vice President, you don't often talk about what happened in 2000. It's not something you do a lot of interviews about. Your former running mate, Joe Lieberman, wrote an article talking about that moment when the United States Supreme Court came back and decided that the recount was over. And Joe Lieberman said, at that time, I said to Al Gore, we should go forward. We still have legal recourse. There's more to do here. And you said, no, for the good of the country, we got to end it. We got to end it right now. Can you talk about that moment, what your thinking was, and how difficult a moment that was for you 20 years ago?
Well, first of all, I don't remember there being any good legal recourse left. The governor of the state in question, where the ballots were not being counted and recounted, had an interest in this. There is no intermediate step between a final Supreme Court decision and violent revolution. And the Supreme Court interprets the laws. They issued an opinion, and to run the risk of violence in the streets without any change in the outcome seemed to me to be not in the best interests of the country. I've heard the president say that if he doesn't win, there may be this, that, and the other. Nobody should be inciting violence. That's dishonoring the mandate of the American people to make this choice. You know, the foundation of our country is the principle that all just power is derived from the consent of the governed. These elections are the way that we give that consent. And there's something majestic about listening to the will of the American people and then respecting the will of the American people when their decision is fairly tabulated and announced. We're on the verge of that moment. And I would urge all Americans, including especially those who might be tempted to follow the direction that Donald Trump pointed in the White House earlier today, to reject that approach and focus on what's most important, and that is the best interests of the United States of America.
And with that, we'll leave it there. Vice President Al Gore, good to see you. Thank you for taking some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.